G'day expats and welcome to another episode of Expat Chat, episode 125 today. And as always, I'm joined with my co-host, Brett Evans, who is the Managing Director for the Europe, Middle East and Africa region. And I was just over there in Dubai in the sandpit with Brett. Good morning, Brett. How are you?
G'day, James, mate. And it's great to have you guys over here. Yourself, Ben and Jeremy. It's nice to, you're old school here, but Ben was the first time in the Middle East. So it's great to give him the Cook's tour. And also, it's your first time in Riyadh too. So,
It was.
yeah,
It
see what the
was.
fuss is about. So, what do you think? What's your thoughts about Riyadh?
Oh, the roads, mate. That's what comes to mind. And I think anyone that's over in the Middle East and that's in Saudi, the roads are just crazy. There's lines on them, but no one, no one, no one abides by the lines. And I guess it's a little bit like it is in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. But I just thought what's funny is where our hotel was probably about a K as the crow flies, a kilometre from the conference. But getting there, it takes 10 to 15 minutes in an Uber because there's not many overpasses. It's just like these roads that just go forever in one
Yeah,
direction. Um, but it's really good. You can tell, obviously, they're putting a lot of money into the infrastructure development and just building a bit of a beast. It's probably what I would deem to be closer to like Dubai like 10, 15 years ago, but you can just tell that if it's good for the economy and it's good for sort of the country, they'll build it. I thought it was really funny when we were sitting down and doing our seminar, just the fact that rather than, sipping on a beer or sipping on a wine or anything like that, we've all got fruit juice. So that was
yep,
that was quite funny. Obviously
non-alcoholic
there's
prosecco.
yeah, that's right. That's right. So um, it wasn't like I'm shocking, anything like that. It was really interesting. You can just tell
Mm,
that if it's good for the economy, they'll do it. So
yep.
I think it'd be very interesting to get back over there. If you blink and you're over there a year or 5 years later, that place is just going to be an absolute beast.
It'd be totally different. So actually, I'm very rude. Sorry, mate. I apologise. For the folks on the call, this is Mr. James Ridley, who's the Managing Director of the APAC region and specialist on the US. So, and that sort of
Beautiful.
leads us into that next conversation we're going to have about, all sorts of
Mm.
fun stuff like about 401ks, RRSPs, UK pensions, mandatory MPFs,
Yep.
the whole lot.
CPFs, all of
Can
the
you
above.
roll? Can you roll foreign pensions? And we're not referring to specific foreign pensions here because they're not all classified as foreign pensions, but can you
That's right.
move a foreign pension, in inverted comma, into Australia? Mate, let's get the jingle out of the way. All the information we're
Disclaimer.
going to talk about today is for informational and educational purposes only. Please do not consider this as personal advice. If you need to speak to someone, get personal advice, speak to a specialist like Atlas.
Absolutely, mate. And I mean, today, good topic, talking about foreign pensions, foreign super funds, everything. There's so many different categories or so many different types around there. Obviously you being in the Middle East, you see a lot of the end of service gratuities and benefits. That's not what you would and I would call like a pension. It's like a final benefit, isn't it?
Yep. Yeah, look, they're sort
Yep.
of evolving in this region. They're now moving towards dues, which
Yep.
under the end of service benefit, you rely on the fact that the company's putting aside money for your, when you eventually leave, whereas under the dues
Yep.
program, it's more like super,
Yeah. Okay.
in that the company funds it on a monthly basis when they're doing their payrolls. So it is
Yeah.
evolving, but yeah, it's a bit of a hybrid at the moment. 90% end of service benefit, 10% dues.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, I mean, yeah, that's actually quite progressive, to be honest, the fact that they're starting to save or force savings for a lot of employees over there. But I mean, I think often when I'm talking to a lot of Australians that are overseas, there's still a bit of confusion around the ability to say roll, a foreign pension in just directly into a foreign super fund. Um, Often I'm finding that even some clients think every now and then that they can roll, say, their MPF or the I guess the Provident Fund that they've got under, say, the um, the carrier that they're working under. If they're a pilot, they can just roll it straight in super, and there's no issues at all. But often you can't. It needs to meet a couple of tests. Right now, when we think about foreign superannuation funds, there's actually not many that the ATO acknowledges around the world, and often there's confusion around this.
Right, spot on. The only one that the ATA considers is a foreign pension by the purest sense of the term is UK pensions. And
Mm.
all they talk about, we've seen private rulings and all sorts of stuff come by expats over the years, and everyone's trying to argue that an MPF or an end of service benefit, all these things are a pension scheme. And the ATO time and again comes back and says, no, because you can access these funds before retirement. So that's what it boiled down to. They might look and smell and sound like a foreign pension, but the fact that you can get access to those funds like a 401k, like an MPF, like a DUS, you can get access to those funds before the age of 60 in the case of Australia, or 55 in the case of the UK. No bueno, no good.
No, absolutely. And often there's usually a uniform type treatment that the ATO will lay on these foreign pensions, which aren't deemed to be foreign super funds. It's usually a type of investment trust. I think normally we deem it to be, if you're pulling funds out of it, a distribution, a Section 99B distribution, which means there's two components of that distribution. There's corpus capital, just being contributed from you or your employer, or done a matching scheme. That's very common for a lot of my clients that are in the US. 401k, if they're getting a matching scheme, it's a great savings tool, great retirement savings tool. But often, again, still confusion. Oh, I can just roll that straight into an Australian super fund. The amount of times you see that in Facebook groups is deadly. Everyone needs to put a bit of a disclaimer at the end of their comments, probably, to be honest. And then the other component is the growth component of the investments. So, if you're investing in a managed fund and that managed fund's got a capital gain or an unrealized capital gain from the units, but you've received income as well, that portion is going to be taxable when you start drawing down on it. If you come back to Australia and you've got let's just do an example, an MPF out of Hong Kong, and you just leave it there, it continues to grow. Australia doesn't really have an FBAR sort of thing. An FBAR is that sort of foreign bank accounts report, which a lot of my clients in the US have to do, or US citizens in Australia have to do. We don't really have that. We don't really have sort of this general form that we have to complete, which lists all our, I guess, Australian accounts, international accounts. We're probably lucky in that sense. But if you're not accessing it, it's not something that you need to report on. It's when you start withdrawing from it, that's when you need to have clear understanding of how it's treated from a tax point of view, because that's going to actually allow you to plan from a retirement income point of view, from a tax liability aspect, and see if you can, I suppose, reduce, or before you repatriate, is there any tax planning you can do before you repatriate? Because there actually is. There's actually a few strategies that you can roll out to minimize the kind of tax that you're going to pay with the ATO. But right now, the only sort of scheme that you can roll into an Australian super fund is typically the UK pension system, and you have to get it. If you're going to do it, you typically need a self-managed super fund, QROPs, those sort of things. You need to abide by the contribution caps as well, which is another kettle and fish. But demystifying foreign pensions, there is not many, if any, except for one, that you can really roll directly into an Australian super fund. Kiwi savers, yep, that comes up. There's actually a trans-Tasman scheme there, which has been set up for a while now. That's a lot easier, and they're sort of governed under very similar rules, but it's the UK pension one, which we sort of treat as a foreign super fund, which is a bit different to the trans-Tasman scheme. Trans-Tasman scheme actually talk to each other, and you can roll it over between super funds, and most super funds are set up for that, whereas with the QROP system and the UK pension, it's quite often that you have to set up a self-managed super fund, but expats shouldn't have a self-managed super fund. And there's a clock that starts as well. When you get back to Australia, 6 months, 6 months is sort of that time frame in which you've got the ability to move back, say, the UK pension. But because all these other super funds or foreign pensions, they're not deemed to be a foreign super fund, those 6 months rules don't usually apply to them. So you've got to think a little bit, not outside the box, but a little bit more strategic about your repatriation and how you're going to manage those foreign pension assets when you come back.
To me, it's that I can't remember the episode where we talk about the importance of prior planning. It is everything, because there's also complicating factors if you're coming out of a Emirates Provident Fund or a DUS, which is considered a foreign trust, the potential of paying tax in Australia nasty. In the same financial year as your return. But I think people, from a mindset point of view, excluding, as you said, excluding the UK, if you've got any sort of foreign assets that you consider to be a pension as such, and you're repatriating the quantum, the bulk of those funds, it's no different to you going to the casino and winning money and transferring those funds, into your super fund. So there's no
Yeah.
benefits. There's no special, categories. I encourage everyone to go back and look at a previous episode of ours about contribution strategies to super, because there are two contributions. And if you've, say, built up $500,000 in a foreign pension, once again, I'm using that word in inverted commas, it actually gives you ability, affords you an ability, because you couldn't put that straight into your super account. But if you want to split it between yourself and your partner, or wife or spouse or husband, then you can. So suddenly it's now 250 into each fund, and then that way you can get below those annual limits that
That's right.
people sort of butt up against. The only exception to that is obviously the UK. So UK can only go from the UK pension into an SMSF. That is, and we find this from time to time with certain clients, where the person transferring the pension from the UK is over the age of 55, so no problems at all. We can move that, but we can't put the other person, whether it's a spouse or partner, in the SMSF because they're below the age of 55. So essentially it becomes one person's SMSF, and then at a later date you can look at doing some changes. But so there's all that sort of complications. So I think we sort of cut the line down the middle. On one half, you've got those in the UK. Yes, it is a foreign pension. Yes, you can't move all of your UK pension into a super fund in Australia if it is going to breach a limit. So you might want to investigate looking at a SIP or something like that that allows partial redemptions. That's the only alternative there. And for everyone else in the other 99 countries in the world, treat that money as if it's money sitting in your bank account when it comes to returning to Australia. It's not preserved. The ATO is very adamant on that. So which is good, because then it makes it easier to deal with, obviously, the 6-month rule you're saying before about being taxed, because it is not a foreign pension, so you can bring that money back into Australia, whatever you want. The problem with the 6-month rule and that rule hasn't been up, all the time frame hasn't been updated for 1,000 years. No. It takes you 10 months to get an SMSF in Australia accredited with HMRC to be added onto the RAPS list in order to make the transfer happen. So you always get to breach 6 months. And people say, well, can I start setting up the SMSF before I move back to Australia? Grace space. Because CMC has to be in Australia, active members test. You can't contribute to it, so therefore you can't roll money into it. So essentially day one of landing back in Oz, if you are looking to move a sizable amount from a UK pension to Australia, you need to start that from day one of arriving, but you're not going to make the 6 months. And that's all HMRC. You can actually get an SMSF set up really quickly. It's HMRC is the bit that doesn't work.
It's a bit slow. Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, I guess in summary, a lot of foreign pensions, even though they are foreign pensions, they're not deemed to be a foreign super fund in the eyes of the ATO. They're often treated as some sort of, I guess, investment trust, and, tax can usually apply on the withdrawals, especially if you're back in Australia. If you're a non-resident, well, that's a different story. Usually they're not, but you might be taxed on, I guess, your country of residence. And therefore, depending on where you are in the world, you do need to think about sort of your repatriation plans and thinking about, what's the best way to reduce the tax exposure within those accounts, even if you're back in Australia. Again, there are strategies that you can employ before you arrive in Australia to actually reduce a lot of the tax there, and a lot of that is usually encompassed in a lot of our financial plans for our clients. So it's one of those things. There's things you can do, there's things you can't. But I think the ATO does need to do a bit of a swift update of a lot of the foreign super fund things. But as you said, Brett, earlier today, it comes down to the preservation rules, access, what you can do with the funds, those sort of things.
Look, it is, and I think that's the biggest thing out of all this sort of stuff is the ATO has indicated they're not going to budge on their views of what happens overseas, but also too, you've got issues that relate to proposed legislative changes with SMSFs, removal of the active members test, increasing it to 5 years in terms of the temporary absence rule. There's all those sort of options as well too. But long story short, folks should consider, once again, ex-US, ex-UK, everyone else in the world should consider moving money that's been saved for your retirement in a foreign account that has been labelled a pension, just treat it like normal cash.
Yep, 100%. Yep, that's it. So, cool.
Mate, I think we wind up there. Just a bit of housekeeping. We'll link below to the Facebook group. there's a lot of cross-pollination between the podcast and the Facebook. A lot of folks in there asking questions. In future episodes, we like to jump in and do a bit of Q&A on the Facebook group. So if you are on the podcast, you didn't know the Facebook group exists, go into the Australian Expat Financial Forum. There's a link down below as well too. You can put your questions in there, and then we'll actually answer on the podcast. There's also a feedback form as well too. So any and all feedback is greatly appreciated. From us, we don't know whether we're doing a good job. All I'm doing, I'm looking at the screen. I can see James. I don't see everyone else out there in terms of whether they're liking us or not. So give us that feedback. If you love the topics, you hate the topics, you hate the audio, you love the audio, you love the video, like whatever it is, we want to hear it all, because this to us is a very important conduit for us to be able to educate and inform expats. So that also leads me into the last point. Guys, rate us, please do. It does make a difference to us. We are able to get to some pretty awesome locations thanks to those who already have given us a rating and review. So please give us a review and rating. And mate, I think we'll leave it there.
Sounds good, mate. Thanks, guys, for tuning in another episode. See you on the next one. Thanks, Brett.
Cheers. Thanks, mate.